We are in studio with Dr. Ahmed Idris. I wanted to make sure ni Doctari. He is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross. We're discussing the funding gaps that we've witnessed in the last year, how they're impacting the work of, for example, the Red Cross, but humanitarian work across the country. We've seen bits and pieces here, stories, but let's talk to someone who does this every day. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you in studio, Dr. Idris.
And thank you for having me.
Before anything else, Jano will share the quote of the day with you. Let us know if it says anything to you, if it resonates or not.
Trevor Noah, South African comedian, commentator, podcast host, and many other hats, once said, "Poverty is not a lack of character, it is a lack of opportunity." What do you make of that? Do you agree?
Oh, it's a great statement. Let's factor in, I think, just think through what makes people poor. A series of things, but most importantly is the context you find yourself in, where you're born. The ability to get out of the cycle of poverty is the most difficult thing, I think, globally. So most people who are born in poverty end up remaining in that cycle for ages. And the essence is that opportunity requires resources. And if you lack those resources, you'll be stuck in this endless cycle of lack of opportunity. So I completely agree with it, completely. Our work in the humanitarian system in building resilience and having impact in communities is actually to give people opportunities to come out of the difficult situations that they're in. And that is essentially what Trevor Noah is talking about.
Well said.
I wanted to start maybe from, earlier we were talking about how Kenya essentially doesn't really have a middle class, right? We were trying to, pause it. And you hear it said often that we are one paycheck away from poverty. A lot of people are one disaster away, one illness, one, big life change away from poverty. Then I think about what happens when you are already poor and disaster hits. From a first responder perspective and from someone who's worked in this, what does it mean when disaster hits long term beyond the headlines?
Yeah. So think about it this way. The 2024 floods, it affected a better part of the country, so the rich and the poor alike. And one of the the discussions around that particular disaster is, at the end of the day, disasters are not just for poor people. The difference is those who have wealth are able to survive it. And this is how generally the conversation on disasters, there is a shock, whatever the shock is, whether it's a flood or it's a drought. The ability to withstand that shock, to survive it, is what the key question is. That is what creates the vulnerability that we see in the media. That is what contributes to the numbers that we see, people displaced, people in IDP camps, people who lack food. If you do lack the ability to survive the impact of a particular shock, then you end up getting into long-term vulnerability. And that is where the challenge we have. If you look at the cycle of disasters in this country, unfortunately, first it affects mostly geographical areas that are on the higher end of the poverty index. Look at the northern Kenya, constituencies and counties that have accumulated with some of the poorest people. But it's those the countries that have successive disasters between floods and drought. So what it does is, for every disaster, it reduces further the ability to withstand the next disaster. So look at Turkana or Tana River. Tana River is a good case study. Tana River had the highest impact in terms of the floods 2024. People were in displacement, thousands of families in displacement. Just before they could rebuild, we're talking about now them facing this particular emergency, a food emergency, the drought. So over a period of time, but the simplest way of looking at it is, if you keep hitting at a wall continuously, it will come down. And that's what is happening to these populations. The shocks are hitting consistently their ability, they're reducing their assets, they're reducing their wealth, and they're getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Not because they're not putting in the same level of regenerating wealth. It is because these shocks are depleting their ability to, withstand and regenerate this wealth.
Was there a point at which we could have put structures in place to make the impact less Yeah, just less frequent. So that's a combination of resources, disaster management, planning maybe. Do you feel like there was a point at which we could have said, we can predict certain patterns, let's put these structures in place, and then maybe that window already passed? And what moment was that, if it actually existed?
Look, I think we need to look at it from a more optimistic perspective.
Okay.
The challenge with the development planning cycle is, if you do not plan with shocks in mind, if you do not plan with knowing what the vulnerability of these populations which are going to face, and you don't have that in the planning cycle, then what will be happening is that we'll put resources, we'll have a development plan that has never factored in what will happen to this population in terms of shocks. And so that's the first thing. In terms of strategy of looking forward, we have to have a development planning that focuses on risk information, the particular shocks that population will face, but more importantly, the underlying social inequalities. Because at the end of the day, if we make an assumption that our development planning cycle is that we are all equal, and we have the same rights, as we say, we need to have 1 shilling for 1 man, for example, then we'll forget that there is an entire population that are not participating in the development cycle in equal footing. And by the way, that does not just have a geographical indicator. It also has segments in population. Nairobi is one of the wealthiest counties, but it has also some of the poorest populations living here who are most at risk to emergencies. So if we look historically, we can always say, we missed opportunities. There are things that we could have done. And I think there are things we could have done. I think the independence history of this country shows that our planning activities have not factored in the poorest segments of the population. As early as 1965, you hear, Janet, about a conversation around this famous policy, post-independence, sessional paper number 10. The essence of that planning policy is, it just looked at this country and decided the sections of this country that are not important to plan for, not important to factor in development cycle. And so we've had a long-term consequence of some of the earliest disasters in policy planning, so to speak. Oh, by the way, so our conversation, for those who have us in humanitarian cycles, we say we face disasters, but the biggest disaster you can have is a disaster in development planning. And that is where the challenge lies there.
Thank you for going back to the history. Sorry, Eric.
Good.
I can't say I've read sessional paper number 10. I've read summaries of it, but please take us back to the history of that, because I always think it's important to understand where you're coming from, so that you, like you said, we don't just do blanket things and say, you know what, we're all equal in this country. We're doing 1 man, 1 shilling. We're not all those things. Yeah. Give me a bit of context into sessional paper number 10, what it was at the time when Tomboy, if I'm not wrong, launched it, and why it's important to contextualizing where we are now.
Oh, you're asking me a good question. I really have a huge interest in that paper. If you look at the paper, by the way, by title, it has one of the most beautiful titles. African socialism, and it's the development planning cycle of the country. So, at the face of it, an excellent paper. But look at the spirit. The spirit says, we're going to focus as a country, we're going to put resources only in geographical areas that we consider productive. Yeah, so at that point in time, what are we considering productive? We consider productive and agriculture. And when we consider productive agriculture, it's not even wide agriculture, it's cash crop farming. So we put infrastructure, we put resources, all of it around that principle that there are some areas that are more important in this country than other areas. And that has lasted for many, many years. So what makes our disasters worse now as a country is lack of infrastructure in areas where these shocks are becoming really apparent. So for floods, every time it rains, the entire segments that get cut off completely. People don't get in, goods don't get in, That is it. They basically become islands on their own to survive with whatever resources that they have. That is the problem of the development planning from 1965, where we cut off literally in our planning cycles entire segments of population, entire geographical areas, and we're playing catch-up games, over 60 years after independence to address that. I think all of us have a responsibility to look back and agree that we got it wrong at certain points in time, and what can we do now in terms of reversing that. And so the challenge for you and I, for the government, for everyone is, maybe Tom Mboya and his team got it wrong. How do we correct it today? That's where the conversation is.
Idris, though, that strategy of 1965, how long was it meant to last? As in, did it have, because one could argue that at that point in time we're saying, so we are starting off as a nascent economy. If we develop this, then we take the money here so we can go and then develop the other parts of the country. So within 5 years, within 10 years, we should then be starting to inject the dividends out of here into the other side, right? How long was it meant to last?
No, but that's not what the paper says, unfortunately.
What does it say?
Yeah, the paper, in fact, if we had looked at it from the wider strategy, we're going to invest in strategic areas, get the resources and reinvest within the wider country, it will have worked well. But look at what happened. We had sessional paper number 10, which is very skewed policy planning mechanism. After that, we had a security operation in the wider part of northern Kenya that lasted many, many years. And by many, many years, some people say to date.
It's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing. So the point is, your spirit around the reading of the policy paper is not exactly what was intended
at that point
in time. But what is unfortunate is that two issues. There's a period where you say, it's supposed to last 10 years. And then when it has become part of the history of the development planning in the country. And so that's the challenge, is that it lasted for generations. By the way, until post-2010 constitution, that is when we started having an alternative policy dimension that says we're going to put affirmative development principles, we're going to create certain funds that are supposed to reverse, the long-term impact of this thinking. So if you are to ask me how long did it last from a policy perspective until we ushered in a new constitution. But from a practical perspective, many people who are in these geographical areas still ask the question of whether it ever ended. So when we speak about the current policy planning, bottom investment on the poorest people, it resonates a lot with people from northern Kenya, and because the assumption is if you put investment in the poorest sections of the population, then they will be the biggest beneficiaries of that kind of investment.
The Constitution actually does that, even creates the equalization fund, by devolution as well, and so on and so forth. But in practice, again, we can argue that in practice we still are not yet doing what we ought to be doing. Let's come into addressing humanitarian crises that emerge, because then we have natural disasters and we have man-made disasters. We have natural disasters, drought, we have floods, we have fires, and so on and so forth. We have man-made disasters in terms of we go to war, we fight all the time, and political instability and so on. Institutions such as yours, the Kenya Red Cross Society, which has been here now, 60 years?
60 years.
You're marking 60 years.
We are celebrating 60 years,
We will talk about the 60 years. So institutions such as yours, how do you work with government, and let me actually use governments in plural, national government and the county governments, to address some of these emergencies and also to build resilience of communities?
Thank you. By the way, celebrating 60 years, we'll be happy to talk about that, what it means for us as an institution and the people who deliver services on behalf of the institution. The Kenya Red Cross is an organization that is auxiliary to governments, public authorities. And this is, by the way, the Red Cross globally in every country has that characteristic. We're supposed to be auxiliary. And by being...
He was wondering, is it complementary, supplementary?
Yeah.
It's
so now, that's now where I wanted to get into. Our work is meant to be complementary to the public authorities in the fields that we have a mandate, in the humanitarian field, in strengthening health, in responding to disasters, in investing in young people. So we have a solid mandate by law. We are meant to work with the authorities in the development planning cycle, so that we understand what the priorities are. Second, we are supposed to support the public authorities in terms of specifically the disaster risk management function. Because at the end of the day, the era of, by the way, big governments, that governments do everything, has ended globally. Governments still ought to work through other institutions, both public and private, in delivering key public services. And we're one of those institutions. We are supporting government of Kenya at the national level and at the county level in essentially delivering assistance in terms of disasters, but strengthening the resilience of communities. So our work is therefore broad. I think we have segments of the institution that are working with county governments and national government purely on disaster preparedness and response. And you know, we have colleagues who think about the next disaster, and as soon as they close one operation. We have colleagues who work is to imagine what the future will look like from a disaster perspective. And many people think we are guys who are just idle, who are, you know, forecasting doom every day. I had a discussion with a number of leaders in August to tell them, we're going to have a problem in this October, November, December rainfall, and that's coming from the Kenya Met. And one of them joked, he said, do you ever have any good news? And so on. But unfortunately, that is our mandate. Our mandate is not good news. Our mandate is supposed to prepare for the worst in this country, to think about scenarios of what is the worst that can happen, because someone has to do that job. And our role, and it's something that we are really proud of, is to support the government institutions in achieving that, in scenario planning around disasters, in being able to put resources in advance in terms of the. Eric, did you know that at any given time as a country, we are trying to ensure that we prepare for having a displacement planning cycle targeting at least 50,000 families at any given time. At any given time. That's our plan. And we're planning at any given time to have the shelter, you know, the blankets, the non-food items for 50,000 families. And that job is a difficult job. And it's something that consistently and continuously we engage with the government of Kenya in achieving that.
Wow, I just got goosebumps hearing that. Sorry. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Who takes lead in this planning? I mean, is it you or is it the government?
Oh, government. The government is supposed to do the policy coordination. The government, no, it does actually. Okay. and do the coordination of actors for all of us. By the way, credit where it's due. I just give you an example of the last flood. The last flood, when we put a scenario to the government to say the forecast looks like this, we got resources to say, can you put initial measures around the response planning? So we invested in things that some people were making fun of us on boats, and you saw what those boats were doing in terms of rescue. We prepositioned some of the items, like this 50,000 we're talking about. So now in this cycle, and even in this particular drought, when we had a conversation with the Ministry of Arid and Semi-Arid Lands, this is what the outlook would look like. We got some resources to say, can we rehabilitate some of the essential boreholes so that the populations, as they come around there. So it's one thing to say, can they do better? And it's another to say, are they doing?
Are they doing? Are they
So,
doing something?
Yeah, I think so. For me, the positive around it is that there is an improvement around the coordination. There's an improvement around the policy making on that. But Eric, now we have a law on disaster risk management, something that, and you know, for me, when it was adopted last year, there was a sense of relief because I've been following up on that piece since I was 24 years old, and there's the policy of developing it. Yeah. So there's huge room for improvement around what the government can do better. We have that very honest discussion with the government around it. We have very honest discussions, especially with the county governments, that there is more that needs to be done around planning for poor people and putting resources for emergency preparedness. And that's where, you know, there's a gap.
Yeah.
That's where the gap comes in. Because, yeah, you can say the government, there are agencies in government that think the same way as you do.
Yeah.
Okay? And they will read reports from the Kenya Meteorological Department. They'll sit down with you and they'll see the October, November, December rainfall is going to fail.
Yeah.
And this means that these communities are most likely to be exposed and they will need support. That is one thing to say. The other part is are there adequate resources that are deployed on time to address this? Okay? That's the other part that I ask. Who takes lead on that? Whose resources should be more in preparing and responding to some of these disasters? Should it be government resources or should it be external resources?
Actually, this one is the gist of the topic that we are supposed to have a long discussion. Let me give you a context of what has happened globally and where we failed, you know, on our side as a country. For a very long time, we thought of emergency planning, humanitarian response, as an issue for philanthropists, for donors, and so forth. What has happened globally now is 2024, we had an 11% reduction in total global funding to the humanitarian.
How many? What percent?
11%, which is huge. It's about $5 billion globally. But what is even skewed is when the resources that were available in 2024 were going to some of the biggest emergencies in the world. So they were going to Palestine, the Gaza crisis, to Ukraine, to Yemen, to Afghanistan, to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Sudan, the range of countries. So Kenya does not become a priority for funding within that cycle. So if it's 11% reduction globally, it is a bigger reduction for us as a country. This year, the numbers are not in yet, but the very optimistic outlook of those numbers, it will be a 34% reduction in 2025, the optimistic one. But on average, people, you know, the numbers are settling around almost 45% reduction in global aid. So what does that mean? The era of saying that we are going to wait for someone else to invest in addressing your crisis is just long gone. And that's the first thing that we have to accept.
I want to stop you there because we're going into a break. I know the viewers and listeners will be like, Janet does this all the time.
Someone is saying something.
I agree with the viewers.
Look, you're making a very good point because you said those days are over. So we'll come back and pick up on what happens next. But we do need to go into a break. We're hosting Dr. Ahmed Idris, talking about funding gaps in humanitarian operations, and we'll get into that in just a moment. It's coming up to 7:30.
Will you do a WhatsApp Nation video for us? Yes?
That was such a quick cosign. Yep, that's me.
That's me.
There's just before we get back into the conversation, Oscar Onyango 8763 says, yeah, the days of depending on philanthropists is actually long gone. Indeed, as a country, we need to look inward and generate resources for humanitarian action from within ourselves. And I think that's why I politely interrupted Dr.
Yeah, and you're at that point where you're talking about the reduction that we are seeing in global humanitarian support. 11% last year, nearly 45% this year. Of course, it's going to get worse next year. And this is global. When it comes now to countries like Kenya and some of these emergencies, then organizations such as yours and others, of course, end up with fewer resources. What does that mean? What does that do If you can paint for us a picture, like an emergency maybe in 2022 versus an emergency last year versus an emergency this year with reduced funding.
So a comparison across years, not just in funding.
Right.
There are three things that are at play. One is the frequency of emergencies is increasing. So that's the first one. So these disasters...
it feels like that, but then I convinced myself it's because I'm consuming more news. That's why it seems that the frequencies...
Yeah, so...
but the
frequency is
actually...
actually... So an example of extreme weather events. If you do an average of between 2003 and 2020, last year we were double the figure of extreme events compared to the average of that 10-year period. So it's a fact they're increasing. Then the cycle, in fact, the period of recovery between two extreme events is also reducing. And that's why, Eric, I think earlier you asking the question of, were we not just from, we in a drought now? Were we just in another one in 2023? So the period of recovery between extreme weather events is also reducing. The one that worries me most is droughts. And maybe let me paint a very simple picture. Droughts kill animals for most of these communities. The number of cycles of births you need to recover, you need a longer period of time between one and another. So for residents of Kajiado who lost most of their animals in 2023, 2025 being in another drought means they have not had a period of recovery. So one complexity that we have to factor in when we talk about the resources that are available is that we are getting into one emergency after another, drought, flood, and so on. And that's a global phenomenon. So this is for people who have been saying we don't have a problem of climate change. I don't know what else they can view to arrive at a different conclusion, but that is the surest way of understanding that we have a global climate risk problem. So that's the first one. But then comes in the issue around, even with that context, when the needs are increasing globally, the humanitarian needs are increasing globally, we have the highest number of conflicts in the world that we have ever seen. We have the biggest number of people displaced in 2024 globally. We have the highest frequency of, and extreme weather events in 2024. But then we have a drop in funding. So that's the second. But the third situation that we need to think about, which brings us to the question, Eric, that you've been asking continuously, why are we not putting enough resources from a public spending perspective in Kenya, is that we have a public spending challenge that I think we've had an honest conversation with, but we haven't understood its implication in the sector that we are working. We do not have enough resources available in the country for development planning. We have a huge recurrent expenditure that if we do not reduce, then at the end of the day, we'll keep asking ourselves, why don't we have enough resources for addressing some of these underlying issues that make people more vulnerable to these shocks? Why are we not having enough development agenda? So cumulatively, what we just need to talk about is, do we have enough resources for our development planning? And if we do, are we investing in the most strategic areas? So that's the context in which we need to have that discussion.
I wanted a comparison in terms of the effect of the reduced funding from practically. Yeah. Look at in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, we were able to do this and to respond to this kind of emergency because we had resources. Yeah. This year, if that emergency, similar emergency were to happen this year with reduced resources, what would you do?
So I give you one clear one that we all remember. At the beginning of 2024, when we were preparing for the El Nino floods, we had resources to plan for and prepare for displacement of up to about 40,000 families. So by the time the disaster was hitting, we had put aside and prepositioned items for displaced population for about 40,000 families. Right now we are struggling to reach the 12,000 mark. That's just one example of how practical it is for organizations like ours to talk about what the humanitarian implication of this reduction in funding is. We're struggling with reaching a 12,000 number. So to answer your question, Eric, if today we are faced with a similar scale of a flooding event as of 2024, as an institution, we will not be able to support the public in the same spirit we supported in the 2024 floods. That's a basic and, straightforward.
And a truth that you're sitting with. Can I ask, and I don't know if it'll tie into the next thing, but what are some of the biggest misconceptions around what humanitarian aid covers realistically? Because there's some misconceptions maybe Kenyans have. So maybe paint that picture for us as now we go into, okay, this is why we need to cover.
So the biggest misconception is we wait for an emergency to happen and then we ask for money and we say, oh, Kenyans, please contribute, private sector and so on. That's the biggest misconception. Planning for disasters takes a lot of time, resources, and energy before the event happens. And that itself takes huge resources. Prepositioning items has to happen before, a disaster event. It cannot be done when we have an emergency at play.
It's raining. Let's order 6,000 tents.
It can't happen. And so the kind of support understanding we need to have with the public is the biggest support an organization like Kenya Red Cross can get is not during emergencies. It is before emergencies. During emergencies, it helps. It helps in getting resources for replenishing some of the assets or materials that we use for that emergency. But the biggest investment needs to happen before. That's one of the biggest misconception. The second misconception is that we are swimming in money, resources. So that's the one that we always have a challenge with. And so the nature of requests that come to us, both from private individuals, families, communities, and institutions, it's blind to the fact that we are struggling with getting the basic resources for running minimal operations. So that means we have to have a wider sense of partnership. We have to have some other agencies or institutions doing some things.
But something fairly obvious, not even obvious, just baseline. Who funds the Red Cross?
So if you were to do a division now of the resources that we have, about 60% of our total funding comes from the Red Cross movement globally. So we get resources from other Red Cross societies, especially of developed countries, the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross. So it's a Red Cross movement resource. And then we have about 25% or so that comes from development agencies, of other governments, whether it was, formerly what was USAID, EU, some of our development partners, the French. By the way, the French government, the French embassy has been one of the biggest support for the last couple of years. And then we have about 8% or so coming from foundations, private foundations, and then the assortment of individuals and the private sector in this country accounting for the rest. So this is now, if you look at it from that division, when the international community sneezes, we catch a cold, in the sense that a bulk of our resources are coming from outside. And for me, my commitment at the institution the last 2 years has been, how do we diversify this resource income? So this year, there's a big reduction in our total income as an organization, but we survived. Or at least we are surviving since the year has not ended. What is the worst year? And part of it is because we put in huge investment the last 2 years in just diversifying, looking at other partners, looking east, for example, or looking at Arab countries for resource support. And so we're working on diversifying. But the message to generally Kenyans is, first, this is your institution. at the end of the day, when it is not providing services to you today, it is providing services to someone else just like you. If you have an ability to support, please support. And we want to really grow the segment around domestic fundraising from individuals. Because at the end of the day, the concept around solidarity is you ought to feel the pain of your neighbor. And the neighbor here is you and I. And right now we need to support, which we ought to, by the way, speak about the current humanitarian situation. We need to support people who are food insecure. We need to support in strengthening the institution of the Kenya Red Cross at branch level, local branch level, just giving them the right equipment. And it doesn't have to be, by the way, resource in cash. It is just providing the right equipment. I look forward to people saying, I come from Malindi, you guys are dealing with floods in this area. I want to support in getting you a boat for your emergency response.
That kind of solidarity.
That kind of solidarity.
What are those some of the funding models you're exploring? Because you've mentioned almost diversity, but you've mentioned like also individual, right? What other funding models are being explored to essentially be able to allow organizations like the Red Cross to do their work if the humanitarian aid is being cut significantly?
So look, we want to grow in-kind support, not necessarily cash support. And I think that's one of our biggest strategies. So we have a range of needs in terms of equipment and material. And if someone can get each of those things as donation, more than happy.
Human resource, does that fall?
So the biggest human resource asset we have as an organization is people. We have 300,000 plus volunteers who, whenever there's an emergency,
in Kenya? 300,000 plus.
Exactly. And whenever there's an emergency, so to answer the question that most viewers perhaps have always asked is, how do these guys appear everywhere? Just like that. There was a comment made as a joke by one of my friends, and he said, I'm beginning to think you guys manufacture disasters because the time you take between when it happens and when you're on site is, how did you know? But the thing is that we have a huge support from people who contribute their time and energy and are not expecting any pay. So human resource, if you can give your professional service to the organization as a volunteer, number of hours, a month, and say, I'm an architect, I will contribute 10 hours every year. I will support you in any architectural work and so on. So human resources is a huge contribution on its own. But
I think, sorry.
Yeah.
Had you finished?
Clearly, you didn't want me to finish, but go ahead, Eric.
Human resource is a big resource that you have. I'm coming back into the funding bit. And one, the Kenya Red Cross is anchored in Kenyan law, right? It's recognized as an auxiliary organization that will support the government in responding to some of these disasters. So it's already known that it's there. And in fact, there's documented history of Kenya Red Cross working very well with the government of the Republic of Kenya. I think one of the proposals here on the table from me would be that there be a kitty that is publicly funded that goes into support humanitarian that is managed by. So we're not funding the Kenya Red Cross Society if we have legal issues on that, but there's a kitty here that the Kenya Red Cross is then also able to dip its hand on, working with the government in preparation and mitigation and response to emergencies and disasters. And this kitty should be right there. The same way we have the infrastructure fund now coming up and the sovereign wealth fund. We should also have an emergency fund. We know for sure that we have emergencies every year. Counties, national government, money goes in there as like a fast charge, Like we know it's there, it's a kitty that's supposed to help save lives. The other thing is maybe then the Kenya Red Cross, I don't know how you do it, work out a program that allows the private sector to come in and support and put in money and resources towards disaster management. Let's look at COVID and the COVID time. We saw the establishment of a committee. They didn't do a good job of accounting for what they were doing with that money. But then we saw big corporations coming out to say we are putting in money to support in COVID response. Equity Bank and Dr. James Mwangi as a family, then we have others, Safaricom, EABL and all, they were all saying, here is how we are contributing. Maybe this is a way in which even all these foundations can say, here's part of our money is going into the Red Cross kitty, and the Red Cross is managing it. Then the onus is on you to come and explain what you did with the money that you got from your donors, which you do anyway, I suppose. So is there such a structure within you that would go to tell all these foundations and organizations in this country, first and foremost, and then individuals, that if I'd like to donate to the Kenya Red Cross today, I can go into this, I'll put in the money, I'll get a message that tells me thank you very much for your response. At the end of the year, there'll be a report somewhere that says, this is how much we've spent this year on preparation, on response, and on support post-emergency.
But see, because we're celebrating 6 years of Kenya Red Cross, let me give you a bit of history of where the rain started beating us. Kenya Red Cross in the Moi era, in the late 70s, 80s, and up to 90s, the leadership of Kenya Red Cross had the face of what was then the opposition government, the opposition. So we had Charles Rubia, who was a very strong member of the opposition, Matiba, people like the late Professor Wangari Maathai, who served as director of the Kenya Red Cross. We therefore had a challenge then that the government saw the Red Cross as just another part of the opposition.
Right.
So we historically had, from early independence, resources that were coming from the government directly to the institution, and then Moi stopped. And so the struggle since the early 80s has been how to restore that. So in 2023-2024 financial year, we got a direction from the government to say we're going to put an annual resource allocation to the Kenya Red Cross to support. It was a small fund, but to support some of the basics intervention. So we are headed in that direction around getting direct support from the government. So we've gotten in the 2023-2024 financial year something small. We've gotten this year in the 2025, so the 2025-2026. So this is work in progress and heading in a good direction. Can we make better use of the resources that we set aside for disaster as a country, the public resources? Yes. And we're having very frank conversations with the line ministries to say, how can we have some of these resources invested in the operations of the Kenya Red Cross? So that's the idea of the disaster funds. Can we have access to it to plan and utilize for emergencies? That's a conversation that is going on, and it's something that we all ought to participate in general in terms of pushing for it to be concluded. The private sector in this country are also investing a lot in terms of supporting vulnerable communities under the CSR frameworks. By the way, when I listed to tell you that about 8% or so are coming from the private, and so on, KCB Foundation, Safaricom Foundation, Equity Foundation, Airtel, some of these bigger corporates. I was taught in law school, once you start listing, you will end up with a problem of sending a message that maybe it's a conclusive list. But those are just examples. We have a range of institutions, small corporations, private institutions, who are giving us resources. What we are pushing for, where the potential is a very coordinated approach, where we don't work with these institutions during emergencies, exactly what I was telling you. Because right now, a better part of the support is during emergencies. So we want to have a discussion around how do we make better use of the CSR spending to speak to addressing vulnerability in advance of an emergency. 2 weeks ago, we had an MOU with Equity Bank to do exactly that. How do we have a coordinated approach within which the CSR priorities of equity and the operational planning of the organization are aligned so that they can participate meaningfully. And by the way, Eric, that coordinated, the question is always asked to me from a negative sense. Why should we be investing in the Kenya Red Cross, or why should this company be investing in the Kenya Red Cross and not other organizations? And the answer is a simple one. If you tell me every time there's a disaster, the other organizations who are there before Kenya Red Cross, please invest in them.
Yeah.
I will really love that they also get those resources. I will be more than happy. But the point remains, whether it is a road traffic crash or a flood or a drought, we're the first in, the last out. And we ought to be, in that sense, be the primary partner for these institutions, and we're working on achieving that. And thank you, Eric, for pushing it. So you should be speaking about this more often, not just in this program, but also at the private level to the leadership of these institutions to say, why don't we do better in terms of coordinating? But can I tell you what the problem is?
Okay.
The Kenya Red Cross brand always risks swallowing other brands whenever we are delivering assistance. So perhaps maybe in many institutions it does not present the best opportunities because people will remember it's the Red Cross that delivers.
So sad.
So that
sorry
is,
to
yeah,
say.
it is.
And it's true. Actually, he's hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It just, there's a reframing that's needed, because it's like, are you going to worry about your branding or about people's lives? But he's actually correct. And it's not just with Humanitarian, it's across the board. They're like, oh, the brand will be swallowed. I was going to ask about audit. I think Kenyans also have an audit trust issue, you know? So how can you encourage and let people know, like, no, funds will be audited transparently? And sorry, you were going to ask a question.
No, if you can do it in just a minute, so that I can do the next 60 years of the Red Cross. That's what I wanted to get into.
Okay, so a minute to just...
So look, from an audit perspective, the Kenya Red Cross is a trusted institution. The fact that Global Fund has worked with us for the last 12 years as principal recipients, and Global Fund, their audit processes, their requirements for accountability are very high. The fact that we worked with Global Fund for about 12 years, and we continue to work with them, overseeing huge resources annually, that says a lot about the fact that we can be trusted with resources, and we look forward to being trusted with more.
With more. Next 60 years of the Red Cross, and I'll say that from the work of the Kenya Red Cross itself, but also how do we get to the point where the Kenya Red Cross is the one funding other Red Crosses? And I'm sure it doesn't, but that we're so disaster ready and disaster prepared that...
And resourced.
That it's just a little bit of oversight here and there.
Yeah, by the way, first, that's already happening. The Kenya Red Cross is considered a leader in the Red Cross system in this continent and the rest of the world. I have people who are supporting other countries, employees, volunteers of Kenya Red Cross who are supporting other countries. By the way, even in Tanzania, our neighboring country, we had technical support to our sister organization in Tanzania. We support the Sudan Red Crescent. We've supported Djibouti. I've had someone in Djibouti, I think, for more than 3 years supporting Djibouti Red Crescent in strengthening. So we're already pushing for that.
Right.
The next 60 years, this organization has to have the partnership, the investment to be able to have impact, not just in this country, but beyond. And that is what so we've just adopted our next 5-year strategy. And the 5-year strategy, one of the key pillars is how to do more here, but how to also expand to do more within the neighboring countries.
Thank you very much. Funding gaps in humanitarian operations, Dr. Ahmed Idris, Secretary General for the Kenya Red Cross Society. Happy 60th anniversary.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. In the next hour, we talk about Kenya's inequality crisis, a country of the poor. We're going to host Rogers Kidia, Accountable Governance Lead of Oxfam Kenya, to talk more about the inequality crisis. Stay with us. It's coming up to 8 a.m.